We have two guests who are joining us now for this conversation. One of them is here with us in the studio, the other one joining us virtually. The one in the studio is Dr. Duncan Ojwang. He is an advocate and he's here as a lawyer. Good morning, Dr. Ojwang.
I'm not licensed currently.
You're just a trained lawyer.
I teach law. I'm licensed in Illinois. And I practice in Chicago. I teach law in Kenya. I'm a dean of law school. Was until last month when I decided to move. Asante.
Karibu.
Morning.
Karibu sana.
Morning. 3 mornings, yes, to everyone.
And all of us, collective morning to you.
Yes.
Morning as a time of day.
Back that way. So, okay, there's a lot that's happening in the country. In fact, we are now in the budget, thick in the budget-making cycle. Yeah. The finance bill is being debated. Memoranda have been presented to the committee. It's still an issue in the public domain, and all this. The government and how much it's spending is a big issue. Yeah. There's also something that's big that's also happening in the circles that you operate in, and this is vacancy in the office of the Director of Public Prosecution, because soon the current holder of this office has been nominated to become the Director General of the National Intelligence Service, which is also another big thing. Okay, now all those things are what we want to discuss, but let's start with just the easier ones first, and this is on the issue of the finance bill and law, and the lawmakers and the work that they're doing. Because we're asking ourselves, do people understand their positions? Do people understand the weight of the offices that they occupy and the weight of the law of the land when we're looking at all these matters? When you hear all these conversations about the finance bill, looking at it, legally, are you happy?
I'm happy for the robust discussion going on, courtesy of the 2010 Constitution, that give the people a real chance and stake to discuss and even to critique and even to criticize whatever they feel they don't like. So that is maturity in our discourse, and I'm seeing the debate is going on fiery, of course, with a little collegiality. I've seen the tons of memorandum submitted to the relevant committees. I've seen the public engagement out of parliament by the leaders. I've seen teams caucusing. I think the Azimio team is to meet this week also. Today, to try think of their position. So it is actually, a tale of two cities. That this is the same country where we know how to channel. We have institutions. We have mechanisms to deliberate on important issues and try convince each other. And I think that it should start from a point of view that everyone loves this country. Everyone wants to do the right thing, so that it shouldn't be so much the talk of those who like the country versus those who don't like the country, those who are prone to wander, as we sing in SDA Church, versus those who are leading and going through the narrow and straight path. I think there is enough blame to go around. There is enough good arguments to go around. We might want to dig deeper. To what extent are we seeing group thinking? Like yesterday I saw a very vibrant group saying, I already have houses. Government cannot verify whether the person carrying that sticker really has a house, their own house, and they're not renting. So there is a little bit of group thinking, but in between lies the truth, and I think all sides can simply abbreviate because that is the essence of the truth, that nobody have the full truth. In between lies the truth. So I think I like the discussion going on.
I mean, also I think Waikwa coming in, I know kind of you've weighed in on this, whether it's been salient or overtly. Do you think that, I mean, CTO often says that having discussions like this or having things like this come about, what it does is that it progresses conversation and that things come out in the public that otherwise would not have, and that you get to hear different sides of or entering into a discourse, and you then mature in your governance, citizen participation, or even your democracy, however you want to define that. Do you think such things come in to then help to progress democracies, to progress discourse? Because here we are, and there are people weighing in a manner in which they've never weighed in before. Where is your mind around this conversation that currently is in Kenya?
Yes, I think this, or what we've seen with the finance bill, actually is what we should be seeing in respect of every issue that government brings forward, whether it be the law or a policy proposal. And as you've noted, this is what we ordinarily, or the Americans actually love using this term, perfecting our democracy, giving citizens or making citizens more active to be able to contribute to issues of governance. And so it's been heartwarming for me to see how much people have come out. Of course, there are questions about whether people are only debating one issue within the finance bill while ignoring a lot of other issues that are quite critical. But even having said that, I think it's still very positive that people have become very engaged. And just going back to the issue that Eric had raised, and in fact underlining the point that he made about the weight of people's office. I just want to underscore 3 points relative to that. The first one is the role of MP in all this. Remember, for purposes of taxation, the only person or the only office that is given the power to decide on what kind of tax may be imposed is Parliament. And I feel, and this has been the unfortunate thing with our Parliament, is that Parliament has never recognized its full power and exercised that in accordance with the Constitution. So we expect that over time, MPs will be whipped one way. Likely Kenya Kwanza MPs will be whipped, and all of them, if not most of them, if not all of them, will be voting the way the president wants, while Azimio will be whipped, and they will vote the way their leaders will likely want, which shouldn't be the case, because Parliament ought to be independent. And the first thing I think that we need to recognize is the need for members of Parliament actually knowing that this is where the public is watching to see how they exercise the power that has been donated to them independently, and recognizing the separation of powers, and not necessarily listening to the president or listening to anyone else other than the public. The second point, which is related, during the interview the president had with Eric, among other journalists earlier in the month, the president actually, there is a popular line there, that is why, and this, I'm quoting the president, that is why the Constitution gives me the power to tax. Actually, the Constitution doesn't give the president the power to tax. And this partly goes to the kind of information that is out there. is the public getting the right information? Is the posture that the public is getting from the president and the executive the right one? Why should the president insist that he has the right to tax when in fact that right belongs to parliament and not himself? Is that getting into the space of parliament? Of course, the president has an obligation to come up with policy development, including policy on tax, but it's not his obligation to tax. And then the final point I would want to talk about in terms of weight that each of us should have is, for me, salutary. Seeing employees or various labor unions and labor representatives and workers yesterday come out in peaceful protest to express their concern about the finance bill. For me, that's really commendable, because it shows that citizens have become active. Of course, it's a conversation. We are not necessarily, or I wouldn't be the first one to say that the finance bill shouldn't be passed at all, but I think it's important to have this conversation so that we are able to tell the leaders, these are the things we don't want to see, but these are things that we agree with, and this is where you tweak. And the leaders can actually also provide reasonable justification why certain things should be there and why certain things should be accommodated, even if they look or they may seem excessive. So it's the conversation that Professor Ojwang was referring to.
But you see then, even as you say all these things, Waikwa and Prof, the people are discussing, and it's like you've said, it's a good thing that we are all now participating openly and actively on issue of taxation. In fact, it's for the first time that we're actually seeing this kind of heavy conversation around taxation. Yes, it may not have gone widely into everything in the finance bill, but it's there. But just like Waikwa is saying, Doc, the members of parliament are likely to vote according to how they are whipped. The majority will vote one way, likely whipped to vote all of them to the person a certain way. The minority are likely to vote all of them to the person a certain way. So, for example, if the minority votes no to the finance bill, it doesn't matter whether there are some parts of the finance bill that they accept or they are okay with. It is what the political leadership of the minority says, or what the political leadership of the majority will say, that will carry the day. Then what's the point of having all these conversations?
No, the conversation are an end by themselves, I think, because they enrich the discourse. They influence the discourse. I saw the chair of the committee coming out and saying, we have to discuss, after this I will have to discuss with the CS Treasury and see where we put the many comments. If we don't agree with them as a committee, we have to give justification why we think probably we have heard you, but this is better. So, and you know, us in the academia, we are used to this. You know, it's only in academia where people search for the truth. And when we get it, we boldly declare it. And I think we almost need to have some people who are going beyond simply I'm pro or anti. Not just in terms of semantics, but in reality, to kind of help us to say, okay, I've had this side, I've had this side, and that is where parliamentarians come in, that they are supposed to remain and listen to both sides, listen to their constituents, of course, listen and caucus. There's nothing wrong with caucusing, and come with the right solution. I'm kind of glad that the middle class are waking up, because, you know, in this country, most of the issue of social justice have been left to the people in Kibera, Mathare, and so finally the groups you are talking about, the middle class are waking up. They have been they have been not helpful in terms of assisting this country in change. Most of the change have not been born, or they have been born minus the middle class. But having said that, the Constitution itself gives the principle of social justice. The preamble talk of social justice. Our values talk of social justice. That aspect of social justice is very radical.
Yeah.
Because it says that it deliberately look at how to go and balance this country, go for those who are not able, so that in the preamble, the Constitution talk of the national value and principle of governance that bind all the state organ, patriotism, human dignity, equity, social justice. That is a loaded gun. Inclusiveness, equality, and all that. So that Constitution is egalitarian. In other words, I think that this Constitution was tired of things as they were. That it realized that there are other people who have been left behind, so much behind, that it is not the Constitution that is saying, let's move from here. It is saying, let us deliberately go for policies that can reach out to those who have been left behind. That is the concept of social justice. Almost what Sarafina did, you know. When you look at recognize the aspiration of all Kenya for government based on social justice, I think that aspect of social justice, that is in the preamble of the Constitution. That we are committed to nurture a government, recognize a government that is based on social justice. So committed to nurturing and protecting the well-being, not just of individual, but family. Not just family, but community. Not just community and the nation. And I think sometimes we over-elevate the individual and forget family, and forget community, and forget the nation. So that there is a balancing item. Finally, when you look at Article 21(2), the state shall take legislative policy and other measures. So yes, make legislation, but you can take other measures in order to achieve progressive realization of social rights. Could this house levy be the other measures? And that is where the debate is. Huh?
For progressive realization.
Why are you smiling sheepishly?
I am actually smiling. I am smiling broadly because you brought in a legal angle to this discussion that now in my mind throws it wide open. And I have to ask the question. A discussion such as this one, which ends up with this 3% levy, tax, whatever it is called. Academia are accustomed to debates. They are accustomed to talking out issues. They are accustomed to looking at facts. They are accustomed to talking about evidence-based decision-making process.
Discourse.
Should such a discussion not have then started in academia, so that by the time it is coming to Parliament, all the evidence that you require to support the argument, as opposed to people just giving their uninformed views, are things that have been thoroughly thrashed out. And this concept of public participation is given the full throttle it needs, because the discussion is open and there are no limitations put on it. And the narrow-mindedness of political interest is actually removed from it.
I think that will have helped. I see Waikwa is ready. Because sometimes we also just shoot from the hip in the name of public participation. You know, public participation anticipates prior informed.
Yes. In its pure form.
Yes. So you must be informed. You cannot participate if you are not informed, and prior to your participation,
Yes.
there is some preparation, and that part, court have been very clear that the government must prepare you. So an MP cannot call you to a hall and say, I've called preparation or I've called public participation on how to use CDF. You don't know how much they are given, you don't know the budget, and they're like, what do you think, Mama? Check. so it can simply be ritualistic or something to sanitize. And so, yes, I think, but just... So there's the social justice, and I want to hear Waikwa view on what he wants to do with the constitution aspect of social.
Yes, please.
Very radical, so to speak. But then let me also say that this might not have been shot from the hip, because at some point I saw what the Nyanza team proposed during the Kenya Kwanza, for example. I was called as one of the consultants, so I participated in editing the document.
This is when the president visited Nyanza.
And no, that is before, during the campaign, before the election.
Okay.
Their view was this: there are regions in this country that cannot access fair credit and lending. That they, beside when Joy Donde tried to regulate the banks, there are some people who get to the bank and already when you seek loan, you are told you just want to get another second wife. And there are people who come there, stereotype is taking the negative element and blowing it out of proportion. There are people who get to the bank and they are told, we have been waiting for such business mind, come in, take the loan. So now that group caucused and requested that, there is a serious issue that we cannot access fair lending and credit, including mortgage.
So that's social injustice.
And that is historical. Yes. So that, now look at Nairobi. Some of our people, I come from Homa Bay, must just be in slum if you can't afford. Because somebody who come from Kiambu can commute to Kiambu and come back in the morning. If you are from Homa Bay, you'll find yourself in Mathare if you cannot afford, because you must stay somewhere. So this group were very concerned about that issue. And so according to the idea was that, the government must find a way of accessing housing. Now, I've gone through the Kenya education system.
I see.
I've gone through the Kenya education system.
Yes.
Yeah, I've gone through the Kenya education system. I was told 3 basic needs: food, shelter, housing. Now, all of a sudden, shelter,
clothing, that actually
clothing. It doesn't say how expensive it is. Shelter is still the housing, isn't it?
Yes.
As a basic need.
Yeah.
That report is very elaborate. Most of the money put in our banks there are lent somewhere else and not around. So there are people who cannot access credit. There are people who cannot access fair lending. And the government think, in its wisdom or lack of it, that maybe there is an opportunity here to have people, and more people in egalitarian way, access housing. Yeah.
Waikwa Wanyoike is a constitutional lawyer. He joins us via video link this morning. And Dr. Duncan Ojwang is a lawyer. He is in the studio with us. What we are discussing is the law versus everything we are seeing. We'll also, of course, touch on, now there's this whole heat being raised. Nordin Haji is to be vetted by Parliament again for the position of Director of the National Intelligence Service. We've seen several civil society organizations coming out and saying, no, this man ought not to be given this. But let's look at it now from the legal side of things. Waikwa, now is your turn. And Dr. Ojwang was like, I'd like to hear your thoughts on how we can get to this realization of social justice.
Eric, I think you should have told me that I'll be interviewed by 2 professors. I didn't realize that Dr. Ojwang was going to join. But anyway, I appreciate the question. Before I come to the issue of social justice, so that I can tie it up with my other points. So the first question maybe is to respond to CT and whether this conversation should not have started with academia before it even gets to the political space and the public space. And I agree to a large extent. This is one conversation that would benefit or have benefited significantly if the academia was engaged. Not that academia hasn't. In fact, when it comes to issues of housing, there has been quite a lot of research, and affordable housing, urban housing, the issue about informal settlement, there has been quite a lot of research. I personally know of research was started by Muungano wa Wanavijiji in way back, just before just after the Constitution passed, together with University of Nairobi and Strathmore University, Katiba Institute, among other institutions, just to look at what's the best way, including self-help in terms of accessing affordable housing. And they are very, very good report. In fact, I saw Dr. D the other day refer to one of those reports in terms of, for example, how much people are paying and what we call under that study, poverty penalty, that people in informal settlement, for example, are paying a penalty, because when you think about how much they pay for a 10 by 10 unit, it's significantly more than what somebody is paying for rent in Muthaiga if you converted it in unit parts. So and that goes with water and access to other services. I'm not sure how much this government is looking at those studies, because those studies also talk about models of how to achieve affordable housing. And part of what is being questioned by the public is whether the government actually, or the model that the government has chosen, is the right model. And in fact, added to those questions, for example, is the government genuine? Is it really collecting money to build affordable housing? Is it collecting money to build housing based on this social justice concept that Dr. Ojwang is talking about? Or is it actually using the opportunity to collect money from the middle class, the lower class, and the working class, as we may put it, to be able to facilitate rich people access credit and make more money, given the model that it's used? If you look at the study I was talking about, that study resulted into something we call special planning area, a declaration that was made by Nairobi in respect of Mukuru, which allows for certain planning to allow the government to be able, and the people, to be able to access areas in Mukuru, bring services, and that gets prioritized so that whatever housing is built is not just good housing, but it's dignifying housing. Again, the government has completely slackened on the use of special planning area. It hasn't progressed much. Yet that has been what I guess Kenya Kwanza would like to call a bottom-up grown solution using research. So that's one. And so when Dr. Ojwang talks about social justice, I agree with him. I actually one of the strongest supporter of affordable housing. I'm also one of the people who believe that the government has a role in facilitating some of these things. But then my concern, as I believe is concern of some of the Kenyans, is whether the government has the trust. First of all, has the right design, is approaching this the right way, and has the trust from the citizens that they can actually entrust it with their money to be able to build the houses and pass those houses to the right people. As we know, when we had the other, the national housing, facilitated housing, we saw members of parliament, ministers getting allocated 1, 2, 3, 4 units when they don't need it. What says that this will not happen with this government, even assuming they build the house, because there's even a question whether they are collecting money to build the house. So trust becomes an important issue, and that is significant when you listen to the citizen. Obviously, affordability. The economy is in a very bad state, but we talk about economy as if it's something that happens out there and happens in government, but doesn't happen in people's homes. In fact, the first impact when economy is doing as badly as the Kenyan economy is doing is the people, the ability of people just to afford basic goods. And yes, I've had MP says, what is 2,500? 2,500 for somebody who works, who has to be taxed, but lives, for example, in some of these either informal settlement or in fact is on a low wage. It's a lot of money. So by trying to minimize people's concern about how the cost of living impacts on their ability to support this housing fund, I think the government is making or is being tone deaf, and the government needs to be a bit more sensitive about public concern. I just want to make maybe two other points, and going back to the question that Eric had posed. What's the point of the conversation if members of parliament will, after all, vote the way Ruto and Rigathi wants, and of course the Azimio people will vote the way Odinga wants, and Kalonzo and I guess Martha Karua. There is a point, Eric. There is a point for this reason. Our democracy and our political democracy operates because of something we call insecurity of tenure. This is political democracy. The politicians may pretend not to listen. The president may have his vested interest in all this. He has a predetermined outcome. But this conversation, and when he doesn't listen to people, when he acts tone deaf, has a delegitimizing element to it. And it will have consequences. What those consequences are, I don't know. But there will be political consequences ultimately. Whether that is making people more vigilant throughout his tenure, which I hope is the case, for me, those are consequences. But more importantly, when people are having these conversations and the government seems tone deaf, remember, it doesn't start and end with the president. And it doesn't start and end with the president, what the president tells parliamentarians to do or coerces parliamentarians to do. There is another arm of government, the judiciary. And so, for example, if people have been raising really critical issues and yet these are not listened to or considered, when there is litigation, these are some of the things that the judiciary will be looking at. So at the end of the day, of course, there is a point to be having this conversation. If nothing else, it also exposes the infamity of some of the elected leaders we think are supposed to be protecting our democracy, especially members of parliament.
Waikwa, if I can just jump in there really quickly.
Yes.
I mean, we talk about the Constitution as supposed to be a guiding principle in just about everything that folks within, the geographical space, the sovereign space of a nation will do, regardless of where you are, right? But then it also seems as though the same Constitution then would be a stumbling block in some of these things that we speak about. Not in the sense that we might see it off the top of, but if we say, according to the Constitution, public participation needs to take place, but in its purest form, that public participation then, just on that last point that you've made, cannot be public participation if the public is unaware about the elements of the things that they're meant to be participating in. So the process starts from informing and educating the people about every little element of the subjects that you are engaging in. Right. Can we say then, because we're being bound by a constitution that says you must engage in public participation when it comes to something that will have direct impact on the lives of Kenyans, but Kenyans have not been informed about the details, is that not a point upon which there should be then some kind of lobbying? the issue here should not be whether it's 3% part of my salary, but that you have not even told me about how this thing is going to work in the first place. We shouldn't even be getting to the point where you're touching anybody's money, but we should be insisting on, can you share with people the details end to end? Is that not what the Constitution envisaged?
Of course, do, and I'll be very quick. If I was litigating a case on this finance bill in respect of housing fund and raised the public participation issue, the question I would pose to the judge is, when you, I would obviously get all the statements we've had about what this housing fund is, from the president, from his economic advisor, David D., members of parliament, and all others. And all that information has been so contradictory about what the government is trying to achieve. And then the question to pose to the court, which is the question you're posing to me, is, what is this housing fund? And if we were, for example, the government came and argued, oh, there was public participation, what were people participating about? There is no public participation. If in the first place people are not informed, but importantly, even if they are informed, that they are given information that is not reliable.
You know, this brings it brings one thing to mind, though. We are talking about the finance bill, and all we keep talking about is the housing levy or tax or whatever it is. And that finance bill is an omnibus. It has very many other things. And it's like everything else in that finance bill that could be contentious is not talked about or even mentioned or isn't even brought to light. So if we talk about having a discussion around the finance bill, are we really having an honest conversation about the finance bill? The answer is no, we are not.
Question?
What obligation does the government have in ensuring that the bill as it is constituted is something that is made available to all the citizens, so that the complaint won't be, we don't know the finance bill, it was given to you, it was made available to you, and you did not take advantage of its availability. And availability here is, how do you make it available? Don't tell us to go to a link. That one, you've already ensured that nobody is going to read it.
I think that just as Wakili Waikwa have said, the court have been clear that participation required is meaningful participation, not box ticking.
Right.
And so they have been able to even go down to check were those people informed, were they given the materials. That was one of the issue even with the BBI, that there was no participation. Remember, it was, if you don't want, go start your own. Or wait for this thing in the referendum.
Yes.
And that was not the spirit of participation. So one of the parties in court were the nurses, the Doctors Association, who had a proposal, took it to them, and they were told, by the way, you just go start your own initiative if you are that clever. So it has to be meaningful, public participation. But then the other issue that the court grappled with in the BBI was that there was no clear guideline from Parliament, apart from you could glean over what court have said in the case of Kiambu and whatever, on how to conduct it when it comes to constitutional review. But on this one, I think it is well prescribed that you go through Parliament for this number of days, then it comes to Parliament. The process of budget making is already prescribed in law, and that is why probably it might be possible for them to say, look, what is due to the people is given in law, and I followed it. But then, of course, that does not mean you get 3,000 memorandum and you put one line there they were received. It has to be meaningful public participation.
I want to conclude because we are coming to the end, but we've got to throw in this one question. And this is with the issue of the nominee for the Director General of the NIS, right? Of course, Nordin Haji, who's been serving as the DPP for many years, has, previous to, let's say, July 2022 onwards, has had an illustrious career. People were saying, Nordin Haji and the work that he's done and the professionalism that he's injected into the ODPP has been good. And now, since then, because of the withdrawal of the various cases and the reasons that he's given, now there are those that are saying he shouldn't hold another public office. What do you say on this? Do you think he's being unfairly judged?
And that comes with the territory that these officers, you must be judged. There could be a threshold. You must inspire confidence among Kenyans. I saw what he gave as the reason that as a prosecutor is obligated to withdraw the case for the sake of justice. That this thing where this case have become weak and a witness has failed and then you still keep somebody in court is not administering justice. And therefore, as a prosecutor, anytime the case changes for whatever reason, you have obligation to be honest to say that this case, I don't have a good case any longer. Now, when the public, according to him, could see that, they find it not amusing, but the timing of when the case became weak, but in fact he's saying witnesses withdrew, and it has happened before.
In your opinion, yes or no, he can hold another public office?
He's already holding another public office. He's moving from one to another.
He can hold another. Okay.
He's moving from one to another.
As I conclude, Waikwa, what's your opinion on this in about a minute as we conclude?
My own view is that Nordin Haji is unfit to be Director General for NIS. And the reasons are, one, he has been holding a consequential office. Remember, Eric, the most critical power that the government exercises is what we call the power of criminal law, because it's under criminal law that the government can cause severe consequence to citizens, including under our regime, there is contemplation of death penalty. Why the Constitution gave the Director of Public Prosecution independence is for the reason that the people who are making the Constitution realized how criminal law was being weaponized for political end. And the way it was weaponized is by instituting phony charges, for example, and then at some point either entering no res prosequi or sometimes not, and people being convicted when they shouldn't have been convicted and went to jail when they shouldn't have gone to jail.
I had to cut in here, Waikwa, because our time has run out. But the point you're making is you think he should not hold another public office. That's it.
Okay. That's my point, and more importantly, because not because of withdrawing charges. Actually, for me, it's instituting charges where he was not diligent enough, or he knew political exigencies were informing his decision.
Waikwa, Wanyoike, Waikwa, thank you very much for joining us, and Dr. Duncan Ojwang as well. Asanteni sana for joining us. Thank you for tuning in to Kenya's biggest conversation. That time has run out fast, eh? But yes, we'll have you again next time.